your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week, we're going to look at terror from the sky. And this is kind of a broad category because the sky is endless and the sky becomes space and the sky becomes infinity. So this opens itself up to all different kinds of terrors. And I think we picked a couple diverse options here this week.
Yeah, civilization has always looked up to the sky in awe, particularly for what we call the heavens. But there's also the horror that descends from there as well, from devastating weather to the threat of asteroids and the vastness of empty space. So, like you said, I think it's a great theme for something that will always entice mankind.
Yeah, it's just it has the mystery of the unknown. It has the force of nature outside of our control. It has the threat of other civilizations or alien technology. It kind of gives you a lot of different angles to come at with this one, and I kind of like that when it's not cut and dry.
Yeah, and I think both the movies that we picked kind of encapsulate, that spectrum of like nature and like the unknown and things coming from space or just something from Earth.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. Our first movie this week that we're going to look at is The Birds from 1963, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And, my first instinct when we were kicking around these categories in Terror from the Sky, I thought of Aliens. But then I came and settled down on, well, there's a lot of different ways you could look at Terror from the Sky. And I think this movie fits perfectly.
Yeah, it does. Conceptually, I think it's an awesome movie because we live peacefully among birds, right? And at any moment, they could kind of just start attacking us at any time, and they never do. Like we kind of just live peacefully among them. People just kind of peacefully go bird watching, right? It's in this movie. It's a creature feature that's one of the most common animals on the planet, and it doesn't shapeshift, it doesn't transform, it doesn't like really gain any powers. It's just kind of birds themselves. And I also found, I didn't realize it at first. I've seen this movie before, but there's no musical score in this movie. It's just the sound of the birds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. It's an interesting premise because when you think of nature attack or when you think of creature features, Jaws has a shark. Well, I don't want to encounter a shark, whether it's a scary movie or not. It's legitimately scary in real life.
Right.
We've covered crocodile movies. You looked at there's movies out there with like raging wild boars, alligators. There's a new movie with Idris Elba is being attacked by a lion. Like these things are inherently scary as they're big, powerful predators. Birds are the most innocuous and non-threatening animal, but presented in this movie in their sheer numbers and volume, they're pretty overwhelming.
Right. Or if you have something small, like some kind of like Attack of the Ants, like, it's the ants are transformed to be huge, right? And then become aggressive. Whereas like, like you said, birds are really like they're flighty, no pun intended, but like they're very flighty. If you go near them, they'll run.
Yeah.
Right. And so in this movie, they pose the opposite, they become extremely aggressive.
Our movie starts in San Francisco as our main character, Melanie Daniels, meets Mitch Brenner in a pet shop, and they're talking birds, and they flirt a little bit, and they find out they have a connection between them. And we quickly learn that Mitch is a lawyer, and that Melanie is kind of a happy-go-lucky, rich young socialite who likes to pull practical jokes. And that's how they know each other because she had a practical joke that went awry. We get a little quick glimpse into both characters, but they also, you can tell there's a kind of a chemistry between them right away.
Yeah, they're real flirty, and she kind of comes off as this like troublemaker, but also kind of like innocent at the same time. And he kind of falls for it real quick.
Absolutely. She uses resource from her father owns newspapers, and she tracks him down, and she brings him the lovebirds that he was looking to get for his little sister. finds out he's gone away for the weekend, so she follows him all the way to Bodega Bay, 60 miles north of San Francisco.
And I think that's a great juxtaposition for the movie. That I think that's the genius of Alfred Hitchcock is like the centerpiece for them meeting is lovebirds, right? So she's gonna like bring him these so-called lovebirds, and love's gonna blossom in the air.
Yeah, and this is the film where first feature for Tippi Hedren, mother of Melanie Griffith, and this is the film where Hitchcock reportedly became obsessed with her.
Yeah.
And pushed boundaries to inappropriate levels. But for the sake of the movie, we're not going to cover that. But that's been covered quite a bit, and it's kind of a black mark on his storied history and his career when you look back. And he did some almost Harvey Weinstein like aggression towards her.
Yeah, I think there's a movie on that where they talk about it. But there wasn't internet back then the way there is now, so that stuff wasn't really exposed, so we don't really hear about these stories till years later.
Yeah. In town, she meets the town teacher, Annie Hayworth, and she rents a boat to cross the lake because she wants to sneak up on Mitch and surprise with the gift. So she goes across the lake on the boat, sneaks into the house, which I found very 1960s-ish. The doors are open. She just goes into somebody else's house, and she leaves the birds and a birthday card for the little sister, Kathy.
Kathy, yeah.
And she leaves. She goes back across the lake trying to get in and out. But Mitch he goes inside, he sees the birds, and he comes out with binoculars, and he spots her on the lake.
And she's like looking whimsically, like, oh, I hope he sees it. Like they're like juvenile, like high school kids, like passing notes in high school or something like that.
Yeah, very, very flirty, very like
yeah.
He gets in his car and he drives around the lake while she's boating across the lake, and he meets her back at the marina. But as she's pulling in, and they're kind of like smiles and like being all coy, a gull swoops down and cuts her head. And she starts bleeding down the side of her head. And that's our first glimpse into something's not right.
And her ability to maneuver around the boat and the ladder in heels is outstanding.
It is amazing. No wonder Hitchcock fell for her.
Yeah.
So Mitch takes her into a restaurant. He's getting her cleaned up. Their banter continues. And their banter's a little bit funny. They're kind of like playfully antagonistic towards each other, but always like with a smile and with like, they seem to be charmed at the same time. It's a little unique.
It's one thing I liked about this movie and Psycho is just the dialogue. I think the dialogue are just superb.
So he invites her to dinner at the house, and she wasn't going to stay, but she decides she rents a room from Annie, and she goes to the dinner. When she arrives, she meets the mother, Lydia, who's complaining that her chickens won't eat the feed and thinks she got bad feed. And she meets the little sister, Kathy, who right away seems to adore her and invites her to her birthday party the next day. And she's like, well, I was going to leave. I got to go back to San Francisco.
Kind of catches her off guard a little bit. She's like, are you going to stay for the party? And she's like, yeah.
And there's an interesting setup in the family in that Lydia is an older woman. She's the mother. Mitch, how old would you peg Mitch to be?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to say 35.
Yeah, he's not 20. Right. He's mid-30s was exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. His little sister is like 8. Right. That's like a little strange. Like,
and that's never. It's well, apparently, like I guess is the father dead or something like that. At one point, Lydia says, "If your father was here," and then stops like right when she says that. Like so that even that is left as a mystery in the movie. Like you don't know what happened to him.
But the character of Lydia, with a being widowed, she's presented at an age that doesn't necessarily translate to having an 8-year-old.
Not conducive to having an 8-year-old, right?
Yeah. And a 27-year gap between your kids. It struck me as a little like, who's this? His niece? No, it's his sister.
His sister, yeah.
But Kathy adores Melanie and wants to see her again. Mitch wants to see her again. So she goes back to Annie's after a nice dinner. There's still that banter though. And the women start to talk, and she learns that Annie used to date Mitch, but Lydia pushed them apart because she was afraid of losing her son. She didn't want to be alone. The typical. And it's funny, as this movie was the follow-up to Psycho.
Yeah,
you go back to the mother-son relationship immediately.
There's an Oedipal mother complex that's touched upon, right?
But it's very apparent that Annie still cares for him. In fact, she says she moved to Bodega Bay to be close to him, even though they can't be together. So it's apparent she cares for him a great deal, but the two women seem to be very friendly.
Yeah, and she kind of gives a blessing. She's like, well, I enjoy his friendship, but she kind of gives a blessing. Go ahead, pursue him. Like, we had something years ago, but it just didn't work. But, we're still friends, and I enjoy his company.
Mitch calls her there so he calls Annie's house and asks for Melanie. So he invites her formally to the birthday party the next day. So she decides to go. And while the girls are talking, there's a loud crash at the door. Annie opens the door to find a dead gull that had slammed into her door and broke its neck. And we're like, man, what is going on with these seagulls?
Yeah, I would have left. It's too many bird issues all at once.
At the party the next day, it's a nice, beautiful day. The town is a seaside town in Northern California. It's stunningly beautiful. Mitch and Melanie go for a walk away from the party, and they're kind of getting to know each other. And we learn about her mother leaving when she was a kid, and it kind of gets some insight into how she became the person she is. It's like it's a bonding moment, but it's the funniest part about that moment is they cut back to the party, and you can see both Lydia and Annie intently watching their every move.
Yeah.
But then a flock of birds fly in, and they start attacking the kids at the party, and they're swooping in, and they're scratching with their talons, and they're pecking with their beaks, and it's just, it gets like crazy quickly. So they usher everybody inside. The flock of birds finally leaves, and everything calms down. Briefly,
you're right, but it's one of those moments where it's like, now the kids are getting harmed, right? And so these things are ruthless, and they're non-discriminate as far as like what they're going to do. If they see people outside, whether it's a kid or baby, an elderly person, they just start attacking.
Yeah, it's gone from strange to dangerous with this event.
Right.
So they think everything's calmed down. They're sitting down to dinner, and a mass of sparrows floods down the chimney and into the house, and it's just utter chaos. The house is just filled with these small sparrows just flying around crazily.
Yeah, I mean, which makes it an imminent threat because now they're in the house, right? So now they've gone from like, oh, well, if there's birds, just they stay inside and let them calm down. But now they're just even coming in the house. So now it's an even bigger issue. So the threat is kind of closing in on them, literally.
They finally get them. They get them out. They all leave. They seem to go through these cycles where they're maniacal, and then they calm down and are back to normal birds temporarily.
Yeah.
So the chaos is over. The next morning, Lydia gets up and she goes to visit the neighbor about the chicken feed, and she wants to inquire, what's going on with this chicken feed. My chickens won't eat it. And she goes inside again. Apparently, in the 60s, you just walked into other people's houses, and she finds the man dead on the floor with his eyes pecked out. And that's a pretty cool special effect for 1963. The eyes are, they're red, and they're crusted with black, and they're just holes.
Yeah, they really look like they've been pecked out. It's actually a really good effect. They
flash it. It doesn't stay on the screen for long, but they give you like a second flash to it and then cut away.
Yeah.
And it kind of lingers with you even more because of the powerful image that it just showed you.
Yeah. So like you're still thinking about it while they're moving on to the next scene. You're kind of like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah. Let me see that again.
Yeah.
I want to look at that closer.
I did. I rewound it actually.
So of course. So Lydia goes, she's back home, she's in bed, she's distraught, and her and Melanie are talking. They're kind of getting to know each other a little bit, and she kind of likes the girl. And she mentions how worried she is about Kathy at school. So Melanie offers to go fetch her. So she's like, "Oh, thank you so much." So
Yeah.
Melanie goes to school to get Kathy. And this to me is one of the most famous scenes in the movie. She's waiting outside the school. The kids are inside singing. And it's you mentioned there's no soundtrack. This scene is framed or is framed by the sound of the chorus of the kids.
Yeah, I thought that was really unique. I put that in my notes as well. It's very it's very gothic almost like there's this like choir of like children, innocent children singing, and then all of this ominous stuff starts to happen around her with like more and more birds approaching.
And they sing very well. Like the chorus
Yeah.
is really good.
Yeah.
So she's waiting outside and they keep showing the playground by her. And there's a bird. And there's 3 birds. And there's 8 birds. And then she gets distracted and she turns back and the playground is covered with hundreds of big black birds. And like every square inch, every piece of playground equipment is perched with
It's
a big
perched
black
everywhere.
bird.
Yeah, which is impressive that they're even to do that on the set, to be honest.
And they're just sitting there staring ominously. So she goes inside and she tells Annie, look outside. And she does, and it's like, okay, we got to quietly get out of here and get the kids back into town.
Yeah, and they're kind of it's actually really smart on them. They stayed calm, and then they're like, all right, we're gonna do a fire drill,
Mm-hmm.
right? And she tell and all the kids like what? Which is funny that they were mad because when I was younger, it was like fire drill time. We get to get out of class.
Yeah, we're not doing work. We're just fire drilling. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they go outside and they start to go down, and it's an angled street. So they're going down the hill, and the birds take off, and they swarm, and these are big birds.
Yeah, big crows and seagulls.
Yeah, crows. They're pecking and they're scraping, and kids are starting to bleed, and some are falling down, and they show the bird in their hair, like grabbing at their head, and it's really amazing how they made it. So it was like a scene of just complete chaos and terror.
Yeah.
From these damn birds.
Yeah, yeah, and you can, like you said, you can see that some of them were like the animatronic type thing, like they would kind of like come up on the like children, and then they'd kind of like superimpose like birds like flying by them. I guess when they were making the movie, they had like it was like pre green screen. They had like a yellow screen where they were like filming all these birds flocking everywhere, and they would kind of take shots of that and superimpose it onto the film to kind of give it that effect. So it was very creative as far as how they made it.
Yeah, and it's it looks really good.
It looks really good.
I watched. I have the Alfred Hitchcock collection, so I have the DVD, and I had got it out to watch it, but I was on Amazon Prime, and they had a 4K restored, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was just beautifully restored. It was really well done.
Yeah, I'll have to check that version out. I think I just watched the standard one.
Melanie makes it into the diner. The kids they get them all off to safety. Some are cut and some are bleeding, but they get them all off safely. Melanie makes it back into the diner or the hotel restaurant, and Mitch meets her there. And there's this big discussion about the birds are going crazy, and and there's a group of locals and they're discussing it. And they're like, birds just get crazy once in a while. They're fine. And then other people saying, no, I had this happen. And then, of course, there's a ornithologist happens to be in there.
Miss Bundy. Yeah.
This town of 200, and this bird expert happens to be sitting there, and she's stubborn and she refuses to believe any of the stories that people are telling.
Well, what she provides though is really good because she's given a scientific basis of like why this would be so absurd.
Yeah.
Right. She's kind of explaining how many birds there are and how they don't fly in similar flocks together and how many birds there are in the world. And like she's like kind of breaking it down. So it's not because it's the whole premise of this movie is absurd. So she's there to kind of give like logical scientific reason to like how absurd this would be.
And she's talking about how many there are. And like, well, what if they did all turn against us? and then like she comes to the conclusion like, well, then we'd probably be helpless.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's the one guy in the corner who's kind of like he like seems like the town drunk, and
Yeah.
someone's like he's like quoting the Bible and like Ezekiel, and then someone kind of points out, "You're just drunk." He's like, "Only because it's the end of the world," and takes a shot.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the end of the world preachers. Yeah.
Right, right.
So while this is going on, we then cut to outside and we see a man fueling up his car and he gets attacked by a gull and it creates a gas leak. And we see gas running down the hill all through the town. And an unknowing, unaware man gets out of another vehicle and lights his cigar. And boom, it blows up and it ignites all the gas. And the middle of the town is ablaze.
Yeah.
And
the trail all the way to the gas station and like a couple cars. It's actually a really cool shot for 1963.
I was just going to say the next shot is actually my favorite shot of the entire movie. It is I guess you'd call it a bird's eye view shot. You are way, way, way up in the sky, looking down at the town. You see the flame. You see the burn from where the gasoline is, and you're so far away, and it's just looking at the town. Then all of a sudden, a bird flies into perspective, and another
like
one
right in front of the camera. Yeah,
and your view is truly the bird's eye view, and just how they just brought them into the picture and interspersed them with the long view of the town. I thought was like really cool.
I thought that was brilliant because it's almost like they're part of the aerial assault and they caused it. So like they're kind of like swarming in like World War II like planes or something like that. Like they were part of all the like it was a planned attack.
Yeah, it's crazy. So this whole group of birds, they now swarm the town, and there's more chaos. Melanie gets stuck into a phone booth, and she was actually injured filming this scene with glass breaking and hitting her in the face. And she, at one point, said it was payback for spurning Hitchcock's advances.
Yeah,
But they make it back into the hotel bar, Mitch and Melanie, and one of the locals blames her. This happened when you came. You get the like the Miss Carmody in The Mist, like
yes,
suddenly
yeah.
turning on like you're evil and all this came with you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a trope you'll often see when someone's new into town and all this stuff starts happening, right? All the locals will just like, well, yeah, this all happened because you showed up. Yeah,
Yeah, everything was fine until you came. Yeah.
it's an easy blame, right?
Yeah. And when people don't have an explanation, they need something to pin it on, I guess.
Yep.
So they go to retrieve Kathy, who made it safely to Annie's house. Annie lived right next to the school. But as they approach, they find Annie's body outside the house, dead. And this was a well-structured scene in my mind because you can only show so much in 1963. But you could see blood on her leg, her shoe. She's like her leg's half up the stairs. Her shoe is half off, turned sideways, and like it's very clearly a dead body.
Yeah, they took a lot of care for that type of scene. I noticed the same thing. Like they really went out of their way to, even though the shot is at no point really like focused on her, she's kind of off to the left. But like you can see that they took a lot of care into making it seem like devastating. Like that's really a dead body right there. She's like upside down, her head's on the cement and her feet are upwards.
It's like they achieve relaying the brutality of her death without showing anything.
Yeah, one thing this movie does really well is it just paid attention to details, but I think Alfred Hitchcock was always big on that.
Yeah, for sure. Kathy is safely inside. They get her, they make it home, and at home they start boarding up the doors and windows. It's very I know it predates Night of the Living Dead, but it reminds you of Night of the Living Dead, where they're just boarding up everything, trying to secure themselves from potential onslaught from the outside.
Right, which seems like a ridiculous thing. If you're boarding up your windows and someone comes by, like, what you doing? You're like, there's birds out here. you'd seem crazy. Yeah, like birds.
Yeah, there's always birds out here.
Yeah.
And the birds are gathering outside, and they eventually do assault the house. And there's some really, I thought they were well done scenes. They might seem a little hokey, but a bird gets through the window and it's stuck half in, and you got the head of the bird pecking at Mitch's hand as he's trying to push it back and fight it away. But it's frantic. It's fast paced, and he's getting cut and scratched, and it fits.
I mean, those are big birds. I used to have canaries, and if you tried to pull one out of the cage and it decided, I mean, canaries are like this big, and if that thing started pecking at you, you're like, your hand gets like that. You know what I mean? Like even a little teeny small bird. So a giant bird, that thing starts going off on you, your hand's going to snap back.
Yeah. So Mitch manages to fight him off, get everything secured. He's got some cuts, but he's okay. And then the lights go off. Power's cut to the house.
Yeah, and I think you can hear one of the birds go like real loud, like it bit an electrical line and died.
Like it was either dying or celebrating that it did it.
Right.
Eventually, they go to sleep, and Melanie wakes to strange noises, and she goes upstairs and opens a door, and inside the room, I don't know if it's a bedroom or one of the upstairs rooms.
Yeah,
the roof is completely torn open.
Yeah.
And the room is full of birds that immediately attack her. And see if you interpreted this the same way. Like they're after her, they're pecking her, they're ripping at her, and she slides inside and shuts the door. And my interpretation was she was protecting the other people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what she was trying to do. She was trying to make sure that they didn't get through and start going throughout the house, because then they're just going to start flooding in. I think it was a conscious decision.
And it was more like sacrificing herself, but to keep them safe.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes in line with the character. She wasn't nefarious or anything throughout the movie. She was kind of like a playful troublemaker, but she was protecting them, in my opinion.
Mitch does hear the chaos and hear all the noise, and he opens the door and manages to drag her free without letting any birds out. She's bloody, she's cut up, but she's alive. And Mitch says, they got to get out of town. He gets to his car and turns on, actually, I think it's her car, but he turns on the radio, and they're reporting attacks in nearby towns, and certain roads are closed. So they're kind of faced with, can we get out of here? Are we going to be able to make it out? Is it going to matter? Is this happening everywhere? Almost like an apocalyptic cast to this small town movie that just, becomes bigger in scale just with a few statements like that.
Yeah, it's exactly like they all they know is that they don't have a TV to find out anything. There's no power. All they have is that one radio report that they heard, and then everything else that's surrounding them. So they don't know.
He manages to get everyone into the car, which is a convertible. I'm thinking the last thing I want is a cloth top. Give me a real car. Give me a real, hard top. But that's what they got. So that's all they got. Which
kind of adds to the angst of it, though.
Yeah, they even bring the two lovebirds, because those are the only birds that haven't been acting crazy. They bring the two lovebirds, and they drive off slowly through just a sea of watchful birds, just all perched and eyeballing them.
Yeah, and it's dark out, dark skies.
Yeah, it's starting to. Yeah, it's this like the sun's blocked out by birds. I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing that reminded me, that last scene, driving off with no answers in a world that may be completely undone at this point, reminded me of Demons, from 1985, where they get out of the theater and they get on this pickup truck and they're driving away, but to what?
To what? Yeah, it's happening everywhere.
May not have anything for them.
It's one of my favorite endings of any kind of movie.
Yeah, obviously this predates Demons by 20-something years, but it just reminded me of that kind of.
Well, this movie was influential. Ending. Yeah, this movie was influential in a lot of different ways. So it reminds you, like when you're watching it, it makes you think of a lot of different movies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I consider this movie a classic. Parts are dated. People might think, like my wife thinks this movie's silly. She doesn't like it at all. She thinks it's like it's stupid. I give it a little more favorable view than that. It's very influential. I think it's It's cool. It does some really cool things for the time, particularly.
I think the concept is kind of silly, and I think that's why in the beginning it's kind of like this, almost like a rom-com, right? Like it's like a silly rom-com in the beginning, like they're kind of flirting, they're having this like silly relationship, and like she's kind of just like, "Oh, I'm gonna bring him some birds," and like it's just without the second half of the movie, it's really just a rom-com, right? But then I think they do that because it kind of introduces, like it starts to slowly become horrific, and horrific with this silly concept of birds attacking everyone. So I
Yeah.
think it kind of has that juxtaposition on purpose. It is a silly movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's birds. Like they didn't even try to be clever with the name. You know, it's like, yeah,
Right.
it's birds. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's that's but like but at the same time, like what if, right? Like
Yeah.
almost like this Twilight Zone type thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What if? For sure. All right. Well, we're going to jump forward 30 years for our second film. Our second film was called Fire in the Sky from 1993, directed by Robert Lieberman. And I have to admit, I had never seen this movie prior to this, and it was not what I was expecting at all.
Oh, really?
Um, I would label this movie as a drama
Yeah.
slash sci-fi. There is almost no horrific elements to it. There is some, I guess, there's some disturbing elements and some questionable elements, but that said, I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was very well done. Really a good character study and a unique situation. Had you seen this before? Was this new to you?
I've seen this movie a couple times. I saw this movie when I was a kid. It came out in 93. I saw it when I was like 9 or 10, in like 94, 95, and it scared the crap out of me. Just the final ending when he gets abducted and they show the abduction of what he went through.
Hmm.
That part scared the crap out of me as a kid. And I look at it now, and when you look at it as a whole, it's kind of like this like court drama character study, like you said. The whole town's against these like just honest, hardworking guys that are just trying to keep it together and not get in trouble for their missing friend, who everyone thinks is murdered. But they're also dealing with the like emotional impact that it's having on them because they've all witnessed something that horrified them, and no one
Yeah,
believes them.
life changing for sure.
Life changing, and no one believes them, and so they're trying to just keep it together and not get it, not lose their houses, they've lost their contract for the job. I mean, everything's going downhill for these guys. And
Yeah,
then at the end, you get this like, you just get this it's a really good ending, the last 20 minutes, because you finally get to see what he went through. Because
yeah,
the whole time you're wondering what happened, and then they show it to you, and I thought it was pretty graphic.
yeah,
For 93. I mean, it's not Hellraiser or anything like that, but the fact that this guy is telling you that that's what he experienced, it makes you, because Travis Walton still does he's done interviews up till like a couple years ago, and he still tells the story of what happened.
yeah. And this is important. This is based on a true story.
Yeah.
It takes place in 1975, and obviously there's always dramatic enhancements when they tell a based on a true story.
Right.
But as you said, the Travis is very much recounting this story the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Our movie starts with five men in a pickup truck. They're driving out of the woods like their hair is on fire. And another one of them, there was originally six, is missing, and that's Travis that you mentioned. Our crew is Mike, Bobby, Dallas, David, and Greg, and they're all incredibly distraught. And they go into a bar and they sit down, and the movie cuts to a special lieutenant being brought in by the police to hear their tale. It's kind of a cool setup how they this is how we learn their tale when they retell it to the lieutenant.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. I like how they do it in the beginning. It's kind of like it starts off like kind of action packed. Like, what are they running from? So it kind of just starts off like 0 to 60 real quick, and then you kind of have the interrogation, back to what happened, back to the interrogation, back to what happened, and then it kind of meets at the middle of the movie, and then you're on the same page as far as what everyone else is going through.
Yeah, I liked how they laid out the timeline. I thought it was well done.
Yep.
We find out they're a logging crew. They were finished for the day. It was dusk, starting to get dark, and they were leaving the woods. And as they're driving out, they see a red light envelop the sky, and they're trying to figure out what it is. Is the forest on fire? Is all they can think of, and that's I guess where the title comes from. It looks like the sky is on fire. And this is not a special effects heavy movie, but the crinkling, fluctuating red sky was perfectly done.
Yeah, it was really well done. Like you said, it's not a lot of special effects in this movie, but that it does have an impact when you're watching it. It's not corny, it's not some corny '90s like lighting effect. It kind of just it looks real.
Yeah. They slam on the brakes and stop, and they're all looking at it. And Travis gets out. He's in the passenger seat, and he gets right out, and it's this pulsing brain-like orb in the sky in the middle of this red light, and they're all looking at it, and Travis is looking at it, and there's probably the famous image from the movie is Travis looking up, and then he's cascaded in this white beam of light, and it almost looks like he's, like entranced.
Yeah,
And
like it's physically doing something to him.
yeah, he's like he can't look away, and like it's got a pull on him. I think of like a tractor beam in a sci-fi movie.
But what I like about it is that it doesn't actually pull him up like a tractor beam. It's just kind of like frozen him, like it's giving him like a muscle spasm or something. He can't move.
Yeah, it's all played very, and I guess it makes sense with telling based on a true story, but it's all played very realistically.
Yeah.
There's a burst of energy in the light, and Travis goes flying, and the guys all freak out, get scared, and they want to leave, and they take off. They think he's dead. So the men are all freaking out over what they just saw, unable to come to terms with what the heck is going on. So they all scream and take off. But as they're leaving, Mike is driving, and he's like, "Hey," he stops. He's like, "He's my best friend. I can't leave him. I got to go back for him." So everybody else gets out of the truck, and Mike goes back alone, which is.
And he just tells him, listen, just stay on the road and just keep going. It's the only road back. You'll be fine. But I got to go back and get him.
But he goes back and he can't find anything. No sign of Travis, no sign of anything. So he picks the guys up on the way back, and this is where we first see the pickup driving like crazy out of the woods.
Get bat out of hell.
So we're kind of up to speed on their story. Through this interview process, Lieutenant Waters detects some tension between Dallas and Travis, and we find out that Dallas is a bad guy with a criminal record, and he's kind of an a-hole.
Yep.
So Lieutenant Waters suspects foul play. But they have no proof of anything. All they have at this point is the guy's story, and they know there's a missing man.
Right. Yeah, he even admits it at some point, Detective Frank Waters, he's just like, or I think it's the sheriff, because at one point in the movie, they just kind of like the town wants them to get arrested, and they're like, for what? Because someone went missing? Like, we have no proof.
Yeah. Yep. So the next day, all the police and town folk, everyone goes on a search party looking in that area. We find out they're on the edge of Apache land. Not that really, I thought that was going to maybe play into the story, but it really didn't.
Yeah, they make it seem that way because there's someone kind of watching them, and then they kind of notice that he's watching them, and then they mention that, and then that's the last you hear of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it might have some relevance, but it never did. All they find is they find some bones, and they start digging, and the bones are really old, and it's a dead dog that was buried by its owner. So they find nothing. The suspicion that Lieutenant Waters has about the crew and not believing their story is really spread around town, and the townspeople all think they did something. And Mike in particular was kind of one of those pillar of the community guys that everybody knew, everyone had a kind word about, but suddenly he's held in this suspicious light from what happened.
Yeah, and he's trying to maintain his integrity throughout this entire movie, but he's also genuinely concerned about his friend. Like, him and his wife have an argument about it at some point, and he's like, "Why do you care what people think? My best friend's missing. That's what matters."
Yeah. Yeah, his sister Dana actually is dating Travis. So there's all this family dynamic going on. Mike is a father of two, a husband, and this tension is created where nobody believes him. He actually finds out his wife doesn't even believe him,
Yeah.
and he ends up leaving and getting a hotel room.
Yeah.
So that's really it's one of
It's
those
creating
situations where no one did anything wrong, and now all of a sudden this
everything's,
relationship's been soured by an outside source.
yeah, no one did anything wrong, yet everything's going wrong, right? He loses the logging contract. They're going to struggle to pay the mortgage. That, him and his wife are fighting. Like everything's just kind of crumbling.
Yeah. The crew is all harassed nonstop by cops, reporters. The media has flooded the town. Even guys from a UFO society, they slip Mike a card and say, "Hey, if you need anything, we're here. Call us."
Yeah. Yeah. And he has that whole like looking around, suspicious, paranoid look to him. Plays
Yeah,
that role like right in there like that.
yeah. He's like the guy in the street corner on Sesame Street where he's like, "Psst, hey kid, want to buy a W?" Like, what kind of shady business is this going on here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the cops are telling the crew that they want them all to take a lie detector test. And at this point, they're very untrusting. Even though they didn't do anything wrong, they've been kind of painted in this negative light, and they don't trust the cops, particularly Dallas, who has a bad history with cops.
Yeah.
Um, so they're hesitant to do it.
Yeah, but Dallas brings up a good point. He's like, listen, we don't know what the interpreter is going to interpret. We don't know if that's a faulty machine. We don't know the science behind it. And if it says we're lying, we're going to look like we're liars, even if we told the truth. We don't know that the truth behind that technology and how good it is. And there's a lot of truth to be said in that.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic for people to be so mistrusting of you know the societal structure that's in place. And it's something you
Yeah,
hear about a lot nowadays, particularly from minorities and their interactions. But these
right.
are country white boys,
Yeah,
and they don't trust the cops.
right. Yeah, they're like, we don't want to they don't want to participate. They want to cooperate to the extent where they want to find their friend, but they're like, why are we under investigation? Like, you guys can't keep pulling us back into the station every day and questioning us. Like, we've told you what we know. Go do your job. Leave us alone.
So
So
that
there's a lot of tension with that in this movie.
Yeah, so that feeling of mistrust exists anytime or anywhere where you don't feel you're getting a fair shake and you
Yep.
don't feel like people are believing your truth.
Yep.
Um, Mike finally goes to visit Dallas, and they talk about it. They fight about it. Of course, Dallas is a fighter,
He's hard-headed.
but they decide they all need to take the test. So they finally go in and do it. And there's a scene. It's almost like media's like snapping pictures as they're walking in, and they're all going in, and they get hooked up. They get the sample test. They're told that this guy is the best in the state. He's got the latest technology. It's infallible, which we know is false.
Right.
But they try to give him all the assurances. You have my word, kind of meaningless nonsense that people throw out from the old days that maybe used to mean something. But you know,
Mm.
when somebody starts a sentence with saying "trust me," my immediate instinct is to not trust them.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's how you're going to lead into a lie.
Right.
Uh, but they go through this whole, guinea pig thing where they're poked and prodded and hooked up to these machines, and they all get questioned. And you hear the results in a closed room. The guy who administered the test tells the cops and the lieutenant, Dallas, his test was inconclusive, which makes sense because he was a smart ass at every answer, and he was evasive, and he just couldn't give straight answers. So that made sense. But the rest all passed as truthful.
Yep.
So the official report that the cops give the media and the town is that the tests are inconclusive.
Right. Even though only one of them was. Yeah.
Right. And I found that funny. Before they agreed to do the tests, there was a town meeting called, and you'd kind of touched on this. And I really like this scene because the acting in this movie is very good. uh, everyone has all these questions and these suspicions, and these are why aren't you locking these guys up? And now we're scared. Our small town is in the midst of these criminals, and Mike walks right into the meeting, and
Yeah, I think there's a lot of courage right here.
yeah, and he confronts them all. He's like, "Hey, you know me." He's like, "We built the church together.
Yeah.
We've done this. If you have
Our kids
something
go to school together, right? Like,
I've known you for 30 years.
yeah,
If you have something to say to me or ask me, say it to my face, because
yeah,
you all know me."
yeah. And for him to stand up in front of the whole town like that at that moment, I thought that was pretty cool. And plus, it's Robert Patrick. He was the T-1000, so.
Yeah, right. He's just going to turn into liquid metal if he has to. So I thought that was a great scene because all
Me
these
too.
loudmouths immediately, when confronted with somebody in front of you,
Yep.
like, all right, let's talk about it. You know me. What do you want to ask me? They shut up immediately.
Yep.
I thought that was
Yeah.
great.
Me too.
Mike moves out of the hotel. He goes back home, and at home they get a collect call from someone sounding like Travis. And first they think it's a prank, but the voice really sounds like him. So they pack up a group of people, including Travis's brother and Mike's sister Dana, who's in love with Travis, and they go to this other town to find him. And they find him. The town's like shut down. It's pitch black, and he's huddled in a corner outside of an old gas station, and naked and screaming, disoriented. For whatever reason, they decide to call the UFO group, who comes in to try to find out what happened, and that goes very badly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at this point, they don't trust,
Yeah,
Frank Waters.
yeah. The authority has let them down.
Yeah.
Uh, so Travis is not responding to their questions. It's raising the tension of the situation. And finally, they pull the plug on that and they're like, "All right, get out of here.
Yeah.
Beat it."
Because he's like hurdled up. He's naked when they find him. They have to put something over him. He's kind of like huddled up like an abused puppy. He can barely even communicate.
Yeah, these UFO guys are giving him like the third degree, and
Yeah.
he's can't even get his wits about him yet.
Right. He's in no position to debrief anything.
So they take him to the hospital, and you can see now you get views from Travis's mind, and he's reliving some of the abduction process. He's reliving some of the things he went through, and he's pretty much staying silent. But as he's working through where he is, how he got there, and what he went through, he finally says to Mike, "You left me there." And it's kind of a touching moment between the two because, as good of friends as they were, it's true, he did.
Yeah. But at the same time, he panicked and hit the gas in the car, but then he turned around and went back for him.
Yeah, well, too late.
Too late.
Doesn't
Yeah,
change
yeah.
the fact that you left me there.
Right, yeah.
When he finally gets released from the hospital, he's becoming a little more himself. He's surrounded by media. They want to swarm all over him with questions. He goes back to the house, and there's a huge party for him, a bunch of people, which seems overwhelming to him at this point. He's still having flashbacks, and finally, nobody can find him at the party. Dana finds him huddled under the kitchen table in a ball and reliving his abduction experience. And this is where we finally get to see what he experienced.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool shot because like he freaks out a little bit, like he's almost catatonic. He freaks out when she approaches him and it knocks over the syrup for like the pancakes and the syrup slowly drips off the table and drips into his mouth and then you get this flashback of him waking up in this like organic membrane with like goo all around him.
Yes, that's exactly what I wrote. He's wrapped in like a membrane sack
Yeah.
and tears his way out, and he's kind of floating in a like a no gravity, zero gravity environment.
This is 6 years before the Matrix, and you could see the influence it had because there was like the individual pods that they're in, and as the camera pans back, you just see dozens and dozens of like these pods that humans are being stuck in, and it was very like with the membrane. And I
Mhm.
immediately thought, oh, the Matrix they must have seen this and said, let's do something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's looking through and he finds others. He finds some rotted corpses, and he's trying to find his way out. He encounters some alien suits, um,
looked like
and
gray aliens. Yeah,
Yeah, and he encounters an alien, and to me, they kind of look like if ET was stretched out, like a tall version of a tall, thin ET.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, one he encounters one, and he kicks him, and he crawls away into like a tunnel like opening. But inside, he gets grabbed by two more aliens, and he's dragged to what you'd call kind of like an operating table. And he's stripped. He's wrapped in a new wet membrane, and he's probed in the mouth, in the neck, and the one giant needle descends to his eyeball.
yeah, yeah.
And they cut away before it goes in. I'm like, oh, there's a perfect scene for Matt, right into the eyeball.
Yeah, well, that was the first one when I was a kid. When I saw that, I was like, no.
There you go.
Yeah,
All these things come from
that
somewhere,
was
right?
the genesis. Yeah, that was it.
And he wakes up in the doctor's office. So we got to kind of see what he went through there. Um, Lieutenant, the case is essentially closed. There's no missing person. There's no dead body.
Right.
There's nothing more for them to really investigate. But the lieutenant believes that the whole thing was a hoax and that he was doing it for the fame and the attention. He's like, oh, I'm sure he's got book offers now and all this type of thing.
Yeah, and he's real. There's no bedside manner about it. Like he just approaches him one day and he's like, "Yeah, so you got your attention, huh?" And he's like, "What? I haven't even had therapy yet. Like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about?"
When when they find him, his body hasn't had food or water for 5 days.
Hmm.
Um, it would be an elaborate hoax if it was a hoax. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would be an elaborate hoax. I did not like Lieutenant Waters, was
Yeah.
played by James Garner.
Hmm.
And I just didn't think he was a good fit.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because James Garner so well from all these famous shows and stuff he did in the 70s, and um, he just seemed like an odd fit to be this like miserable, gruff lieutenant. It didn't
Doubting
fit him,
lieutenant. Yeah, yeah. It does seem a little out of place for the
but he was
casting.
also the biggest name in the movie at the time it was released. So
Right. Yeah.
uh,
So they got to sell it. They got to, sell tickets and put big names up there.
he drives off telling the sheriff that, oh, they're going to slip up. Their story's going to fall apart. They're going to slip up, and I'll be there to find them and bring the truth to light. Um, and we cut to 2.5 years later, and Travis is married to Dana. He seems to be doing much better. They have a child and another one on the way. And we see Travis drive out into the woods to a remote cabin where Mike has kind of become a hermit.
Yeah.
Um,
He's got a big beard now. His hair's a little longer. He seems more recluse.
yeah, he was what we saw of him, he was a really good father, attentive father.
Yep.
Where's your,
Community figure. Yep.
where's your kids now? But yeah, now he lives in a cabin in the woods by himself. And they talk a little bit, and Travis asks him if you want to go for a ride. And they talk and they try to catch up a little bit, and they go back to the abduction site. And Mike's like, "Well, why are we here?" And he kind of says, "I should have never got out of the truck." And basically, they forgive each other for,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have got out of the truck. You shouldn't have left me. Hey, we all make mistakes. Like, I forgive you, man. All's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to like kind of heal from this and move on. And what better place to do that than where it happened, you know?
And that's the end of the movie. The closing title notes, again, this is based on a true story. The closing title notes that years later, I think it was 1993,
Yeah.
um, polygraphs were re-administered to the whole group, and they all passed.
Yep.
So is it a true story? Is this exactly how it went down? You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. Travis Walton has interviews up to just a couple years ago. He
Yeah.
still talks about it. And when he does talk about it, I heard him say, he's like every description I've ever given any artist, no matter how hard I tried, they couldn't quite get what was in my head.
Hmm.
Like like it was just so bizarre. Like
Yeah.
I try to explain what happened, and people, the artists will come up with these concepts of like the alien ship and what it was like, and he's like, but it's just there was something else in my head that happened, and you know, it's whatever happened to him was traumatic for sure. But these guys, they stuck by the story for all these years, and they never broke the story.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
And they all passed a lie detector test. And if you believe the movie, all of them passed it except for, one inconclusive right away.
Yeah.
So I think it's, again, I wouldn't never categorize this movie as horror, even though it traumatized you as a child. But I think it's a
Yeah.
very, very good movie. I enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought the pillar of the community type of character suddenly cast in a negative light. I thought the family drama, it was all very well done and very, very interesting. And I had never seen this before, but
Yeah.
uh,
I'm
it,
glad you got a chance to watch it. I'm glad you enjoyed it because I've always loved this movie. I always thought it was really good.
when you
It's
think
just different as
Alien
far as
Invasion,
aliens.
this is not the movie you think
No,
of.
no, it's much more personal, like you said,
Yeah,
character study. Yeah.
yeah, very, very well done. And that just goes to show you from our category, there's a lot of different ways that you can experience terror from the sky.
Yeah.
And for what those men went through, it certainly fits.
Traumatize them for life. Yeah.
Absolutely. So really cool category, really cool movies, diverse as we like to do, very, very different approaches to what can come out of the sky. But all in all, good category
Yeah, I agree. But we'll have to revisit it again sometime because there's a plethora of movies like that.
for sure. All right. Well, we are the Weekly Horoscope. That is our show for this week. Appreciate you watching, listening, however you find us. I'm Jerry. That's Matt, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.